Hey everybody, I'm Sean with Easy Street Billiards. Vic is over here off to the side fielding comments for this live stream. Let's see, we're going to talk today about adjusting on the fly. Like if you're going to go to a different place to play, what kind of adjustments, the cloth conditions, room environment, environmental conditions. And I'll talk about that a little bit, my thoughts on that. Which is sort of kind of like based off of a recent tournament that I played not too long ago, which had very new cloth, which I haven't honestly played on new cloth in years, other than a few times, and it was difficult to understand exactly how to hit the ball and make it go where I wanted to, basically. So I was struggling with being basically having a my vision of what was about to happen was not what reality is happening. And then we'll also go on to talk about percentage of practice sparring in tournaments do I mentally plan for, which is basically sounds to me like, and these are topics from Ray, so shout out to Ray for adding topics. You get, anybody that wants to have a topic covered, please comment. Go to the school website. We've been uploading these, and we will continue to upload these as long as people continue to have things to talk about or want to have talked about, or I can think of anything, which I know will go forever. So don't worry about that. You just need to have your voice heard by speaking, and then we will address what you say and try to help you understand better things that you want to know more about, that at least my opinion of those things, and then you can work on them on your own time. So basically, the second part I would say is like, if you have a goal, how do you go about achieving it in pool? Because there's going to be a mix of like, if you're going to try to compete well in the tournament, how much practicing, how much competing, how much of all the different stuff am I going to do? But we're going to go back to the first adjustment to table conditions, which say would be an under, the greater realm of like going to an unfamiliar location or whatever. So we're just talking about the table itself. When you're playing on new cloth versus worn cloth, or even more worn cloth, it kind of evolves over time. I think the main thing, there's a couple different properties of cloth that change over time, and it depends on how it's being played on and how it's being maintained as well. These are factors. So friction is the number one factor. Now, another thing that people don't really think about, I think that is meaningful, is actually the thickness of the cloth, which then kind of corresponds to like the squishiness of the cloth. When you have a ball, if this was a slate surface, which it is, but it has a cloth covering on it, you would be, when you roll it, it would go a lot further than it does. And when the ball is rolling like this, the friction that's in play is not really slowing it down. What's slowing it down is that because the ball has mass, it's pressing down into the cloth and smashing the cloth in between the slate and then this plastic surface. What you're doing is you're creating a divot, and then as the ball rolls, the reason why it slows down is because the depth of the divot makes it go uphill the whole time. Ultimately, it's constantly pushing down material as it's rolling uphill. That's why it's going slower over time. So the thicker the cloth is, or the squishier it is, the more quickly it will slow down over time. Not just that, but then any imperfections in the cloth, any deviations in the cloth are going to make it bump up and down. And each time it goes down, there's not going to be the energy pushing it back up that there was, either due to the slate being, obviously it's going to absorb energy, and then the cloth itself is going to absorb energy as well. So when you're playing on new cloth, it hasn't had time to get smashed down, and it's very slick, so there's very little friction compared to what there will be later once the cloth has more dirt and other things on it, and the wear of it smashes it down, which creates a sort of like, I guess in a sense, it's going to have more contact with the ball for a little while, but it's going to be very slick, so you're going to get different conditions over time, and you just have to be aware that what you're really more needing to know is like, okay, well, what are the effects of that?
So we're always Sisyphus playing.
We are always Sisyphus playing pool. Yes, that's the beauty of it, is you don't have to go anywhere to learn something, and you always have something to do. You know, so basically, the main effects that you get differently from playing on new cloth versus more worn cloth, and then on, is that the effect of English is going to be changed. Where if you put like draw or follow, it's going to, the friction of the cloth is going to be less, so it's going to reduce the amount of energy loss of spin, in this case, on the cue ball. So then when it hits the object ball, it's going to have a little bit of a different, physical property than you'd expect with slower or older cloth. And what you just have to do is ultimately, I can't really express it in words other than say that even though you know exactly what you need to do to correct, the problem is that you have to experientially learn it. So I would say that the only way to adjust on the fly is to pretend that it's more important that you learn what's going on with the table than you win, because in order to be more instinctive about your game and more calculated, and not be like, okay, if I'm going to make this ball and I need to use right English to try to hold the cue ball to end up in this spot over here, then now on my table I would be hitting it XYZ way, but now on this table, because there's less friction, I need to account for the friction by like, okay, if I put right English on it, it's going to squirt more off to the side because there's less friction, making it not go that way, and then or making it go that way, whatever it is you say, so that it would squirt off to the left more when you hit right English than it would on your table. Not only that, but now because there's less friction, the natural right hand English effect of it, which is that it turns back towards the line, is diminished as well. So the ball not only squirts off more, but it doesn't come back as much. So we end up with, instead of a ball that turns like this back towards the ball, if this is your straight line, that's the effect of right English, is that it starts out left and it comes back to right. With the less friction, it's going to squirt off more, and it's not going to come back as quickly or at all. So you end up with a totally different mechanic going on with new cloth than with older cloth. And you can decide, oh, okay, well, I know that that's all a thing. So when I hit right English, I'm just going to aim fuller, and then I'm going to hit the ball, and that's actually exactly what you do. And then you'll see that you don't know exactly what's going to happen when you're doing that, because you're trying to find out what's about to happen when I do a certain thing. When you're playing instinctually, you want to try to make the ball just go where you want. So I would say the best correction is to establish a pool game where your like generic way that you play involves less spin, right and left English, so that you can have to worry and consider those effects and calculate for them a little bit less often, or less to less magnitude. So I'd say that it's partly like you have to change your game to make it more simple, because when you're adding the complexity of spin, slidey cloth, if you're actually just making the game way harder, because those effects are way less in control, and you're not getting what you want out of the effects anyways. Because, for instance, if you're playing right English on this ball, when you hit this rail, the friction is not going to be applied the same as it is with this rail, which is a little bit more friction because it's older cloth. and then it's not going to reverse as much as you want, and you can't make it reverse more by applying more spin. There's like a maximum that you get. And it's like with slidey cloth, there's really not a lot that you can even do with it. So then, the compensation would be to play positions that require you to use less left and right English, and then only use as little as possible to get away with it.
Brett has a comment.
Okay, we got a comment?
Yeah, two. Crazy, this is the topic. I just played on the weirdest brand new cloth at PNW pool thing 2 weeks ago, and it was just like playing on glass. Spin wouldn't propel off the rail, had to adjust and use more stun versus spin.
Yeah, so Brett, who's a good friend of the channel, and myself and Vic as well, just said he played at a venue where they just put a new cloth on the table. PNW pool thing, for anybody that's interested, that's it. They have a great little live stream show that they do, pool matches. If you're a Northwest Oregon, Washington person, you probably know about them. If not, it's all good. You can go and look at their stuff. Jesse Johnson, Stephanie Shortlift, they're great people. So they just put new cloth on their table, yeah. And what Brett's saying is that basically anytime he tried to use spin, it didn't work. That's because friction eliminates spin's effectiveness, which is sort of the reason why when you go and watch pro level pool, that you see very little English being used on tour, because most of the cloth is brand new. And they've developed a game that allows them to play on brand new cloth, and that requires you to use less spin and using more top and bottom to control your position, and then speed control becomes the paramount thing, because if you get out of line, and now you're like at a steep angle, now you're really in a situation where you have very little control of the ball, the cue ball, because you can't manipulate the angle very well like you can when the ball is more of a full hit. Then your follow and draw has more meaning, because the residual energy after contact allows you to do more with changing the direction, versus a thinner hit. You're getting more tangential velocity off, and then thus, like, if you put, this is your exit line, if you put draw on it, you're going this way, and then you're trying to like draw this way, which it does work, but it's not like you can do what you can do from here. And that's why you want to be playing your positions on newer cloth to be a little bit more where you get the natural angle that you need, and then you're playing more stun and power manipulation, speed manipulation, versus using spin to try to get acceleration off the rail to compensate for being not proper positioning as far as the angle goes. And that basically changes, like, it's a proper, meaning that it's proper for the table conditions. That's what's important, is like when you can spin the ball and make it come around the table, that allows you then to use less pace on the object ball, which will then allow you to pocket the object ball at a higher percentage. But by using spin, you are getting more action off the cue ball, because there's more residual energy in the cue ball, which translates ultimately to travel. And that is what you want. You want less energy into this ball to make it go in the hole more often, and then you want more energy in the cue ball to make it go more where you want, if it's required for that shot. And you have the capability of doing that when the cloth is more worn and has a little bit more friction, and less of that ability when it's new cloth. The putting more energy on this cue ball just makes it spin more, but that spin doesn't translate to velocity, because there's no friction of the cloth to make that really happen. You get very little. So I was dealing with the same thing up in Everett. They just put new diamonds in at the spot up there, and I played a tournament, and it's been years since I really competed on like new cloth. So I basically had to resort to just shooting every shot with no English and just high and low, and then just taking what I get. And once I got the speed better, I started playing better, because then I didn't need to use English to get where I needed to go. And that allowed me to kind of like progress and ultimately like get there, I guess, in the tournament, even though I didn't feel like I was playing that comfortably, because I practice mainly on this table, and then I mostly compete on tables that are far worse condition than this table. and that causes you to like, well, you just have to use spin all the time because you can't just float the ball around. Your draw doesn't work like it does on new cloth, and it's not even irrelevant. It's almost like a totally different game that you just have to you have to almost like practice on new cloth in order to understand what you have to do on it, which is kind of the thing that I think people don't understand about like why it's so difficult to go and play and try to believe that you can compete against top players that are on tour, that are the 800 plus players, where you don't realize that they put in so many more hours on new cloth that when we go to a tournament and you play with them, they've been competing on this cloth and they're used to it, and you are not. And the only way you can be is to just keep your table very well maintained, meaning new cloth every 6 months, which is like an expenditure that most people are not really trying to take, to elevate their game, because you don't really even need to have that until, that cloth level, until you've already reached a pretty high level, because there's so many skills that you need to learn that doesn't have to have great cloth to do. So it kind of is a challenge where, unless you're committed to that journey of like trying to see how high you can get your Fargo, meaning really high, not just like 675 or wherever I'm at, where I know that for me, I still have things to learn on this table, and that if I'm going to try to compete on newer cloth, then it's just going to be like, well, I will figure out how to translate my game to that when it's time. I'm not going to prioritize like understanding more than just like clinically what I need to do differently, because my game is all experiential. You want to get to where you can just get down on the ball and hit it without thinking about all the stuff that's different between this table and new cloth table. If I had played 1,000 hours on cloth that was fresh and new, I could do the things that I can do on this cloth that I put my own 1,000 hours onto. It's just more of understanding that it's like, if you have to just be in learning mode the whole time, because you're in unfamiliar territory when you're playing on new cloth, unless you've been playing on new cloth the whole time, which I know that very few people do, because it's only really new for like 2 to 3 months, and then now it's not new anymore, and it does play better, but it gradually becomes kind of the same. Everybody knows what worn cloth is like, and worn cloth is just fine. With that being said, at the top levels, one of the ways they add difficulty is by adding new cloth, which makes it to where you're limited with your ability to do a lot of the stuff that is kind of fun to do when you're playing pool, which is like spin the ball and do all that. You can't even do hardly any of that. So people that are like more boutique players are not going to be as functionally good on new cloth as someone that knows that you really actually, you want to play your game almost in like a mind-numbing fashion, where you don't do anything that you don't have to do ever, because if you do any of that, it just makes it harder to win, and that is its own challenge, to like subdue your ego enough to just shoot the most simple, basic shot possible every single time. Because if you don't, then the other guy that is, because they're really there to do the same thing that you're doing, but better, because they're willing to sacrifice any idea of what's fun and consider more about what's going to make this happen more often. And that is mostly using less English on new cloth. And that's sort of not fun for a lot of people, where they like playing the game because they get to use a lot of spin, because they like to hit the ball with a lot of different paces, and kind of like don't care where the ball ends up, because they know they can get out of it by using spin and all these other things that don't really work on new cloth. You can rely on your shot making on new cloth, and it does get you pretty far, because the balls will accept easier into the hole. That's true. However, you also have to temper that, with the knowledge that you got to be able to get on the next ball, and you just can't make it harder for yourself than necessary. And a lot of that just relies on you have to be simple. So when you go to a bar table or to a table with new cloth, I would say the main thing you got to do is just minimize any sort of like English that you use. So you just want to stay as close to the center of the cue ball as possible. So when you're practicing, You should just be using the minimum amount of English, focusing on just vertical axis of the cue ball, and using that, and knowing that when you actually go to new cloth, that you have to even be even closer to the center. Like draw is like higher up, follow is lower. You know, if you hit it too high, it's going to be force following like you wouldn't believe, and when you hit the ball, it's going to have a totally different reaction than it would on your table where you think, oh, I'm using follow, but actually by the time you get there, it's just rolling. But on a fast, like new cloth table, when you hit follow, it will still be sliding forward more so than it will on this table. Do we have a comment?
Oh yeah, Brett had said it really makes you think about your angles, and you don't have the luxury of using the spin to spin up the rails.
Exactly. The comment was you really have to think about your angles when you can't spin off the rail, which is exactly true. That becomes more like if you think about it, you're more needing to follow, because the effective friction is one of the main differences when you go from if you think about it like if you guys all understand geometry and it's just an angles thing, when you take that, like, you know, the ball is going here, cue ball is angled here, the angle here, off there, reaction, that's the geometry of the shot. Now if you add in the physics of the shot and how that affects it, you gotta understand that when I hit this ball, if I use draw or punch or whatever, that it's gonna change because of the friction when they collide, and the friction of the cloth and the bounciness of the rails and the absorption of the energy and all that stuff is what changes. The geometry is the same, but what ends up happening with newer cloth that's flighty is you have to use the geometry more and understand that you can't deviate from the geometry by adding the extra layer of physics that you understand nearly as much as you can with worn cloth. You can't exploit the geometry like you can with worn cloth as much. You have to exploit it in different ways, which is that you're going to be able to use more draw and follow to get where you want to go, and more speed and spin or more spin is not necessarily helpful, but more speed or less speed will help you more of the time, because you can actually hit the ball a little bit harder into the hole, be a little bit less accurate, and still get away with it, still get your angles. So then you're going to end up having to play with more center ball positions maybe, but then adjust the angle that your object ball is going into to slightly deviate and change your tangent line to get a little bit different action here, and then that magnifies its way with maybe a little touch of inside, or not touch of inside, a touch of draw or touch of follow to make the ball go either forward or backwards, whatever you need to do, without using your natural, what you've been used to doing is maybe using like low right here to get it to come deep here. But now what you need to do is, instead of that, is you can aim a little bit fuller and then use just draw only, and you can approximate that same reaction. It's just that you have to then see it differently, you know, because your visualization is going to be a little bit different, and it's just understanding that that's kind of how it is that if you put more time in with new cloth, all this stuff just kind of like makes more sense, because you by doing it, you see, oh, that is what I have to do. If you're really like, I'm trying to be like, oh, I want to be able to run more balls on new cloth, what's the adjustment? You know, and then as the cloth gets more worn, you can gradually add a little bit more spin and have that help you, you know, get the rest of the way there. I wouldn't say for myself that it's that I care so much about whether or not the cloth is new or worn. I would say that the majority of what's important is like, well, what are you going to compete on most of the time? And then ideally you get to practice under those conditions as much as possible. And that, you know, if you're going to compete on new cloth, for instance, and you don't have access to that, you know, where you're at, then you're going to definitely have trouble versus someone that does have access. So my recommendation would be to try to find a place that has similar equipment to where you're about to go and try to compete and do well, because you need to have that extra familiarity, that experience, and there's really no way to get it except for by going there and doing it. So that's basically all I have to do with adjusting to like the cloth, for instance. The physics are pretty simple, like I said, just to go back over it, is that if you apply right or left English, when there's less friction on the cloth, you're going to get more squirt, more cue ball deflection, more offlineness than you would with more friction, because at the point of contact here, there's friction at the bottom of the ball that's holding it from squirting directly off to that angle. If you think about no friction, if I hit here on the left side of this ball, the force is that way, but the actual contact point, the tangent line is that way. So with no friction at all, when I hit here, the ball would actually go exactly away from the spot that I'm touching it. The only reason why it still goes forward this way is because of friction. So if you took all the friction away, then it wouldn't matter what direction your cue was facing, hardly. It would matter more where you're hitting the ball. And when you're playing with slidey cloth, the effect of the friction of the cloth is not there, but you still have the effect of friction of the tip. And that's what makes the ball go where you want, is the tip friction is causing it to stick. And that overcomes the slidiness of the cloth. And that's what makes it go straight if you hit off center. So just knowing that, you want to stay as close to center as possible to reduce the amount of reliance on friction that doesn't exist to do what you want it to do, and rely more on by applying a little bit of higher low, then now we're just using what would be the natural geometry to accomplish the shot. So you can use a little bit because there is friction, but the less friction there is, the newer the cloth is. And then some kinds of cloth actually are just slidier in general, and that kind of cloth approximates newer cloth better. But then typically a lot of those cloths that are slicker are also thinner or more less compressible, I guess. So then you're going to get, typically those tables will be faster than a cloth like this Simonis 860, for instance, which is when it's new, it's slidey, but it doesn't stay slidey forever. And that what happens is that it's going to be a little bit more compressible than a lot of cloth that has been treated, and then it's kind of like harder surface, so to speak. You're gonna get more roll, basically, is what I'm saying. It's not that so there's a lot of stuff that you have to kind of like, if you want to learn about it, you can, and I think it's good to like have that in your lexicon, but ultimately the game's experiential to where you don't really need to know all that stuff. If you're playing on this table and it has new cloth on it, and you'll get used to it, you'll figure it out. You just have to be like paying attention to what's going on, and then be like, oh, that's not actually working. I need to do something else that will work. And that, like I said, the best correction is to play more geometrically proper positioning and use less English when possible. So you're just relying more on center ball hits and speed control to get you there, and less on circus shots, I suppose, which are spin. So I think that's about all I have to talk about that. So then the second topic was from Ray. I'll just read it. What percentage of practice, sparring, and tournament do you mentally plan for? Do you try to play up all the time, or do you play some lower skill levels to try things out? Setting expectations for best amount of growth. Or perhaps it's different for each person. Well, obviously, I'd say that's easy to say that everything's different for everyone. We're all different people, and that's what's beautiful about it.
Circus shots. I'm gonna steal that. That's weird.
Well, yeah, it's circus shots. It's funny. Circus shots. Anything with spin is a circus shot compared to like super slidey cloth. Because you'd be like, oh, you're gonna try that on this cloth? It's like not even, But anyways, so I would say that this kind of falls under the category of like goal acquisition. So if your goal in the short term, for instance, like say you have, you should have like, ideally, if you're trying to grow as a pool player and get better, you want to have like short, medium, long-term goals, and having those goals allows you to then, you have like a framework where the decisions are simpler because now you kind of know where you want to go. In order to achieve that goal, you need to like, okay, well then if I want to do that thing, then I need to do this thing. So at the long term, if you say you want your Fargo to be 700 over the course of your life, you'd like to achieve that goal, which I think is pretty doable if you have a lot of time and you're willing to make the sacrifices necessary. Now, when I say doable, I say that because if you're talking about a 700 level Fargo, you're basically putting yourself in I want to be in the 1,000,000 to 1 category of pool player. There's 7 or 8 billion humans on the planet, and I think there's only a couple thousand people that have 700 Fargo, if that. There might only be hundreds. So you're talking about like 1 in a million ability compared to the rest of humanity. And when you're speaking about that high level, you have to make sacrifices that no one else pretty much is willing to make, or you have to have a certain mindset that is also very unique in order to do it, because you can't just apply generic like this is what we do, we show up every day and all that stuff. Everybody knows all of that. That's not where the sauce is at. If you're trying to beat time and see how good you can get before you get so old that your body is starting to break down and can't execute, then now you have to really focus on your goal setting so that you can properly manage it. And a lot of that has to do with being able to adapt your goals to continue to keep you interested in the game, because what makes you better at pool ultimately is the amount of time and repetitions that you put into the game in all the different scenarios that you want to be successful at. And you can use your time practicing to help you put your best foot forward so that you can then compete at a higher level. But in order to raise your Fargo, it's not about necessarily having a high skill level in general or having a complete game. It's about being able to express that in competition. So you have to set goals as far as like, okay, well, I want to be able to, for instance, if you're going to be a 700 Fargo player, my belief is, because I'm not a 700 level Fargo player, but I did approach that at one time, and at that point, if you speak of in terms of like, say you're playing the Ghost, right? When I was close to 700 Fargo, I could beat the 9-ball Ghost, meaning that I could, on this table or another generic 9-foot table that I've been putting time in on, I could break the balls, take ball in hand, and run out more than half the time. And offensively is really the thing that determines your Fargo more than probably defensively. The better you get, the more able to take advantage of the offensive opportunities that occur and the less necessity there is to actually make defensive maneuvers. However, if you don't have good capability of playing defense, then you will lose a lot of games that you could have easily won through a little bit of strategery. So there is that, because ultimately the game is a lot simpler, I think, than most people think. Any game of pool requires you to do basically one thing, which is control everything. So, and when the layouts are simple, you actually can control everything pretty much, and that's the expectation is that you will be very successful at pool if you can do the thing of, I want to have the balls end up in the place that I decide, and I know that if I know that there's a shot, meaning that there's a strike on the cue ball, that will allow all the things to happen that I want, and then I will be able to determine in advance the final resting place of all the balls. If you can achieve that, then you are going to be probably the best player that there's ever been. And I know it's a simple thing to say, but I think that if you understand that that's actually all that you're trying to do ever, all the time when you play pool, is ideally hit the cue ball in such a way that it goes exactly where you want it to go and ends up exactly where you want it to end up. And all the balls that get contacted are doing the same thing. And ideally, you know, if you put enough time and awareness into it, you'll be able to see that you're actually doing everything, and that your ability to just then execute your stroke properly and have a goal of exactly what you want to do as finally as you can, then now you understand that your strategy isn't really important once you can make the balls go where you want to. The need for strategy exists only because we can't do exactly what we want to do, and that there's like, we don't have infinite shots to select from when we only have a limited amount of knowledge, as we do as pool players, about how to do everything in the game. We have to select from what we know, and then we have to increase what we know, and that's really all we're here to do. So as long as you're learning from every shot that you shoot and learning how to more accurately make the balls go where you want, and understand the properties of the physics of the table better through experience, not just reading books and being able to recite, you know, rules, but by actually being able to prove that they're true by using the belief in them to shoot a shot a certain way, and to see in your mind that when I hit the ball and I use a certain spin, that indeed the way that I predicted it would, it will go a certain way, and that now I have to increase my predictive capability so that then when I shoot shots, I'm actually doing more than I was when I was just predicting that it would generally go that direction if I hit the left side of it. Now I'm actually, well, if I hit exactly right here, then we'll actually go exactly right here, because I know that when it hits the ball, that the friction and all that stuff and the spin on the ball is going to actually manipulate what happens here, and then the speed of it will make it go a certain distance. And I know as much as I can about all that stuff, and then after that happens, then there's going to be residual energy on the cue ball that's going to make it go wherever it goes based off of the physics, you know, and all that stuff is not, you don't have to read books to understand that that's what's happening here. What you have to do is just get out here and do it, you know. And then, so what you're doing is you're constantly having to just, you know, set these little goals. So for instance, if your goal is to be a 700 player, which is what we're talking about, and I think that it's worth speaking about what actually is in reality happening, is your goal is to make the balls go where you want, and you got to know that you're hitting the ball, it goes, everything that happens after you shoot the shot, you did it, and that by paying attention to the entirety of that objectively, you will learn just through seeing what's going on. And then when you shoot another shot, if you had objectively seen what was going on for the last time you struck the ball, because you had a plan for what you wanted, your ideal, this is how I want things to go down, is up here, and you shoot the shot, and now this is what happened. The differences between that is knowledge that you're acquiring if you're seeing what's happening that's not the same. This is my desired reality, this is the reality that occurred, and now in order to more closely approximate my desired reality, I need to continue to hone what I'm doing, not through like judgment of that thing, but just through realizing that, like, okay, if I had seen that thing, that effect that I didn't see, then I would have been able to shoot that shot. It's not that you necessarily have to be like, oh, last time I hit it too full, and this time I have to hit it thinner than that to make it. From a practice standpoint, that's exactly the thought process. But I would say that when you're competing, you should just be not thinking about last time. You should be thinking about this time. And this time is, I want to hit this ball here, and I want to, you know, say go forward and end up in this spot here, so that when I play the 6 to the 8, that I can get around the table maybe either go forward to play short side or back around or come up this way with English or maybe play several rails, which if you see where I'm going with this is that if you know before you've even shot the shot through experience that there's like 5 different legitimate ways to play from the 6 to the 8, it's not so concerning where you actually end up. But that's because my knowledge has allowed me then to see more of the infinite number of shots that are available than someone that is below my skill level, and that's just through process of observation and learning over time that the true physics, the true geometry gives you plenty of directions where you can have makeable shots on this 8 from playing a variety of different places to shoot the 6 from that are all very manageable, you know, and that's just through acquisition of skill over time. It's just knowing that if I'm in this spot here, like say I've already made the 4 and I end up right here on the 6, right? By making a good plan, then I can shoot the shot. But it's like partly is knowing that it doesn't really matter where I get, and that each shot is its own opportunity, takes away from like your worriness about like, oh, okay, well, I'm screwing up and I'm not winning this game because I got too thin on this ball and I have to play safe and I really don't know the shot. You know, it's just by constantly paying attention more to the actual effects that are happening, what you'll realize is it's like, well, what I'm doing is that I'm taking the illusions of pool, which are like that it matters how good you are, for instance, and you're putting that in front of what is going to make me good, which is learning what's going to happen when I hit the ball. It's what's going to happen when you watch another person hit a ball. If you're paying attention to all the information that you can absorb from every shot that you're able to see, you'll be better than someone that doesn't do that in general, because you're going to be acquiring more information. And then when you go to actually shoot a shot and you were paying attention to what the other person was doing, you'll be able to shoot the shot more effectively without doing anything differently than what your best routine is. That just by seeing what other people are doing, like if someone sets up this bank shot on a table that you've never even hit a ball on, you have no idea what kind of cloth is on it necessarily. I mean, there's always hints, right? This cloth has these lines on it. You know it's been played on. So then you can assume there's friction. If there's no wear on it at all, you can assume it's newer cloth, so it'll play as such. But like I said, if you think about that, that's just an observation that can lead you to knowing what's actually going to happen when you shoot the shot. And only by paying attention to those smaller details will you actually learn those things. It's being aware of what's really happening, right? So when I talk about like your medium, short, medium, long-term goals, a lot of it has to do with just being aware of the reality of that, over time, as you put your awareness and yourself into this, that you're going to learn from all the activities. And the most important thing is to put yourself in a position where you're enjoying it so that you can maximize the rate at which you learn, because that's how you get better, is by learning and by having enjoyment in the activity, or having a reason to do it that makes sense to you. That will allow you to learn faster. I think that a lot of people, they don't play pool to get better, they play pool for social reasons, because it is a good social game. That's why they don't get better, is because they prioritize the social reasons of playing pool over being good. Not to say that you can't be socially enjoyable as a person while you're trying to get good, but if you're spending more energy talking to people than watching people play pool, then you're going to get better at talking to people. You're not going to get better at playing pool. It has to do with how you focus your time. So, people that play league 2 to 3 nights a week, I would say can get better at pool, but then if you think about the amount of time that you're spending at the pool place, not playing pool, versus what you could be doing, which is if you're in a not necessarily a competitive environment, but a practice environment, they say that when you're playing against another player and you're playing one-on-one, that you're hitting, in general, 8 times less balls than you would be if you were playing by yourself. And because you don't have to wait for the other player, you don't have to go sit down, first of all. They don't have to get up, they don't have to think about what to do. You're not thinking about what to do as much because you're working on a certain thing that's already been pre-decided. And I think that people don't realize how important it is to be able to be in practice, because you're going to hit so many more balls than you would if you're playing with somebody else, that unless your goal is to learn how to actually learn what that person's game is, it's not even important to play anybody else, because what you need to do is learn how to move the balls where you want. And that if you're not watching what that person is doing when they're doing what they want, you're not learning anything from that experience. And that's one of the things that people don't do when they're playing League, is they don't watch every single game. And not only that, but most of the games that they watch, the players that are playing are not good enough necessarily to be expressing what they really want on the table. And that can long term affect your progress if your goal is to become a 700 player. Now, if your goal is to enjoy yourself at League and have a good time, you can do that pretty easily without getting better at pool, because pool can be fun even if you're not great at it, because you're still going to be able to make those great shots and still going to get all the different like competitive juices are all going to flow at every level that you play. That never goes away. I don't think, maybe it does for some people, but to me, I don't feel like, the first competition I played was much different than the one that I played last week. It's just, you're going to feel a little bit differently about things. Your expectations are going to be different. You're going to insert different words into categories that exist across both events. And then once you realize that it's just like, actually it was the same as the first one, the last one. It's just that I am different. I behaved differently. I did different things, and that by understanding that you're in control of that, then you can tailor what you're doing. So that if your true focus is getting better, then you should be prioritizing what players do that are getting better, which mostly after a certain point you have to kind of abandon playing non-serious pool, because non-serious pool is a habit. And if you're trying to be 700 player, then unless your non-serious pool is 700 level, which for most people it's not, because it's not, you can't really get to that level without focusing constantly on what you're doing, because any distraction, any deviation from what you're trying to accomplish will then create an error that's exploitable, and then any other player that's competent should win from that situation, and then your Fargo will not go up as a result. So you got to throw in like skill acquisition, hit the number of balls, but then you have to go out and then test yourself in order for your Fargo to be higher, because you got to be able to prove that you can actually do it when it's important enough for you to say, this is what my goal was, and now when I go out there, I'm going to achieve my goal by demonstrating my improvement in skill, my improvement in my level of ability to make the balls go exactly where I want. And that when I encounter a shot that I don't make that happen, that I know that there's an area at which I can improve, and then the list of those things is infinitely long. And then the question will become at some point is like, well, what shot do I want to shoot in XYZ situation? And then if I'm not good at that shot when it comes up, then what am I going to do? And the answer for that is always a little bit more uncomfortable than people think, which is that you're supposed to just shoot the shot that you want to shoot every single time, in my opinion. Why would you shoot a shot you don't want to shoot? If you don't want to shoot it, then you should ask yourself why. If you haven't framed it in your mind that it's what you want to do, you shouldn't be doing it. And by wanting to do it, that's how you get better. Even if you fail, that's the thing. It's like you got to shoot your shot all the time, because otherwise you're going to learn someone else's shot, and it won't be you anymore. It'll be them. and that's not going to be as good as you. Once you get to a certain level, the way you express yourself on the table has to be your version of pool, not somebody else's version of pool. And at the beginning, you can like learn someone else's, like you do these drills, learn all this stuff, and get out there, and you will be successful because the pool is very standardized up to a point. But then once you start reaching, I feel like where I'm at with the game, it becomes more of like, okay, well, I have to shoot the shot that makes me enjoy myself when I'm playing it more so than the other shot. And then it's not about winning so much, it's about finding what's the best shot for me. And then if I fail at that endeavor, then I need to practice that shot so that I can be successful shooting it and shooting the shot that's my shot, because I decided that it's going to be the way I want to shoot the shot. So if you decide, okay, I'm going to be aggressive here and I'm going to try to get in my position, that's the shot that you're supposed to work on if you don't do it. Now, if you decided that I'm going to play safe here because it doesn't look reasonable to try to get out, so maybe a situation where, it's like you don't have a bank shot and then you can't make this cut shot. Now what do you do? I mean, well, if you go for it here, you're probably going to fail because the only really legit shot here that I can see is to try to three-rail combination or a three-rail bank the forward and the side, which if you think that's a high percentage shot, then you're either a great banker, or, maybe you're wrong, which is you're only wrong if you haven't practiced the shot. That's why I say that's what shot you choose, go for it. But you should be good at it, and if you're not good at it, then you need to practice it, because then you can be better at being you. If you don't practice it, you're just going to be like, okay, well, this is my shot, but I'm not good at it. Where's that going to lead you? I mean, come on. You know what I mean? It's not about the shot. It's about learning that the shots that you shoot, you should be trying to be more successful at over time. So if you're not doing it, figure out a way to do it. And that's just reps. That's practicing. You're not going to be able to practice shooting this three-rail bank shot just by competing with people. You have to actually set it up and learn it. It's not going to come up often enough in a game, playing in a match, where you have zero control of where the balls end up hardly until after they're already there, and then you're hoping, oh dang, the spot came up where I can shoot this bank shot 3 rails in the side, so we're going to go for it. Like, how often is that actually going to happen? That's the thing, is like, if you just compete, you don't get to learn all these little niche scenarios that could be shots that you really enjoy doing that are nuanced, that they just don't come up often enough for you to really lock it in at that time. And that's what practice is for. But you don't have to spend all your time practicing, because then you won't really know what your game really is going to be like when you're competing. That's the thing. You have to find out for yourself what kind of competitor or what kind of style am I. And that a lot of times you don't find out what your style is until you start to compete, because it's really just hitting balls mostly mindlessly a lot of the time if you're not really dedicated. But if you already kind of know who you are, then you'll see that it's pretty simple about knowing what you need to do. It's more about getting out there and doing the thing, so what's that?
It's 11.
Oh, it's 11 now. Okay. So basically, I would say, to like sum up, which I kind of got off in the weeds a little bit about your short, medium, long-term things, is that like your long-term goal should be like what I said, is like, well, I want to be able to shoot a shot a certain way, because over the course of my life, then I'm going to have a long list of those abilities, and those are the shots that I like to shoot in different situations, and then I'm going to prioritize learning those, and then I'm also going to, for instance, work on being a good, well-rounded player. That could be your lifelong goal. So then anytime you're in a situation where you're like, okay, what I'm doing now is getting me closer to that, then you should be good to go. And then short term, your goal is obviously to like, well, if I'm going to compete in a tournament on 9-foot tables, maybe you should spend a little bit more time practicing on 9-footers, and then if you're trying to like get better in like, okay, I'm going to play against these players, then, and you're like 500 level Fargo, well then, playing against, 700 level Fargo players will help you in some ways, but and also not necessarily going to help you the way that you want, because what you're going to have to learn how to do is beat players that play at all levels, and that if you're not consistently beating players that are 500 and you're 500, that means you're 500. So you got to be able to focus on beating your peers and learning, okay, who's the next player that's above me that is my target, and that I'm going to like analyze their game to study what they do that is admirable to me that I'm not as good at, and then I can practice those skills, and then I'm going to challenge that player, and I'm going to beat him at his own game. I'm going to play his game, but better than he does. And then now you know for sure that you're better than they are, because not only can you use your skills that you already had beforehand, but now you can use the skills that you've watched them to display, and you can use them to beat him. And that's what you're doing when you learn how to beat someone over time, is that you just study what they do and you learn how to do it, and then ideally you learn how to do it better than they do it. And then how can you not be better than them, because you still had all the skills that you had before are still there. You're just adding someone else's skills to your skills, and now you can use all of them. And it's more like an egoless thing where it's like, well, if that guy's beating me, what is he doing to beat me? Why is that guy a better player than me? And then, learn a few things about what you think that is, and then you go back and then you play again, and then you keep doing it. And if you have enough time and you have enough discipline, you don't even need to necessarily have to play against different players. What you need to do is you need to find someone else that has the same mindset as you, and that as you get better, they develop their own game, and then now you're constantly being faced with a new version of them, and they're constantly being faced with a new version of you, and thus you're actually not doing the same thing. It's like you're both evolving over time. The problem gets to be when you're playing against players that aren't evolving, you can't see how they're doing anything differently, and then you yourself can get complacent, and then you yourself can be like lose sight of your goals, and that's because the people that you're around are not trying to evolve as the way that you are, and that can cause you yourself to get lazy in your own evolution. And you need to be very careful about that, and that's why you need to set goals, and you need to be clear in your mind about the objectivity about being like this. What's more important here is that I achieve my goals, and that the people that are trying to achieve their goals will witness that and see that, because they can see the change, they can see the modifications in my game, they can see the improvements in different areas of my game, and then they can understand that that person is actually someone that is getting better as well. And then you form these little groups, right? And that takes a while when you're new to see that, because better players that aren't getting better, you can't tell, because you don't know what they can do. And that as you get better, you'll find that some players that were getting better quit getting better because they have life challenges or whatever. And that's part of the game, is realizing it's a recreational activity, and that in order to get good at it, you have to sacrifice the time of your other recreation in order to a certain extent to get better. And that has to be on your list of like ways that you make sacrifices for the game so that you can get better at it. And that becomes like one of the medium term things, is like, well, if you want to set yourself up to be a 700 Fargo player, you actually have to show yourself that that's actually a legitimate goal for you. Then you have to change your whole life around making that happen so that you can do that. And that's pretty much how it is. A lot of people want to get better, but they don't change the way that they run their life to make them get better. Because if you don't put time in, you won't. It doesn't matter how much you read, how many YouTube videos you watch. What matters is when you go and you play, what you can do against another player is what's going to impact your Fargo. And a lot of that stuff is just, you got to be here, ready, and you got to be like thinking everything that I do helps me at minimum not be worse. You get up in the morning to stretch, you do your cardio, you do all that stuff to help you be better at pool, partly, not the whole thing. It's health in general, right? But those are the kinds of things you got to think of like as things that you can do outside of the game to help you reach your long-term goals. So I think that's about all we have time for. Do we have any announcements? We do.
Evo.
We got the Evo. It's not quite, we're not set up 100% yet, but we have it all set up physically. So hopefully by the end of the day, which is, what is it? The 18th today. So we're about to do that probably the next week or so. I already have a couple people that have challenged me to play on the stream, so I have like a short list. Anybody that's trying to play that's northwest, ideally local to Tacoma, We're gonna probably do 1 to 2 stream matches every week. I'd like to do at least. It doesn't have to be me playing. So we'll be looking for people to volunteer to commentate and people to come in and play a little bit. We haven't really discussed like between the business of the Easy Street whether or not we're gonna like
Right,
focus
right.
on, you know, money matches. I don't think that's necessarily important. I think doing challenge matches is fine. Solado matches is good pressure. Just having being on the stream as we continue to build, you know, the following, you know, but it's going to be really good for everyone that wants to be involved with it. So we're basically anybody that wants to play on the stream, get a hold of me or Vic or Easy Street Billiards and do that. Also, all this content that we're generating is being uploaded as we go to the school.com website. Thanks to Vic here, she's hooking it up and doing all that tedious work. So that's all adding to that. So you can click the pin link to go to the school.
Brett's challenge, Ray's challenging Brett. Brett raised his hand and Ray's like, let's go, Brett.
We'll set that up, guys. Why don't you guys figure out, you know, when you can do it, and then we'll do it. Maybe, yeah, because that'll be fun. Anyways, what else do we got? Yeah, so that's pretty much it right now. We're gearing up for Christmas and then the holidays, so we're basically staying home because it's raining like an inch every day right now.
Membership waitlist is
Yeah, if you guys we're also, now that the pool tables that we're gonna get for the business for the pool hall are available, we're doubling down on looking for a venue, and one of the things that we're doing now is taking membership applications to create a wait list to see how many people are interested in being members, and we're looking at, you know, a lot of different business models, one of which is a membership structure. So we're just seeing how much interest there is in a monthly unlimited membership to see if that's going to generate enough income to where we don't necessarily have to worry about doing anything complicated or whatever. And so if you go to the Easy Street Billiards WA.com, I think it's /memberships, then you can get on that list. And I think right now we have 80-ish names, and we're not going to cap the number of names that are on that list. So if you have interest in it and you're legitimately serious about doing it, then you should definitely get on the list. If you live in Spokane, I don't think it's productive because that's not really what you're looking for. So I'd appreciate it if it's like, you know, serious people only, meaning that if you live close to Tacoma, Washington, then and you're a pool player, I would say that makes you a serious enough person to put yourself on the waiting list. And that now when the choice comes to where like, do I actually want a membership, then you'll have priority over people that didn't do that. And that's really the purpose for this list, is for locals of thousands of people that play pool in this area. How many of those people want to be members, and how many want to have the opportunity to be one of the first members? So if you want to get on that wait list, that would be cool. If not, that's also cool because we're doing it either way. So let's see.
Ray also called me out to do a stream next week.
So I think that is actually it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and also, you guys, any more stuff that you want me to talk about? We're doing a lot of these, educational streams, informational streams weekly, and we're adding that to the Evo Sports as the new element to that, because we're trying to really focus on helping people compete at a higher level, increase their Fargos, increase the amount of enjoyment that they get out of the game. And I think that people, are looking for growth. They don't have the direction, and I'm basically just trying to open your mind to different ways that I see the game that can help you continue to evolve under a framework of like not having unlimited time. It's like if you're 15 years old and you're watching this video and you have a table at home and you're practicing every day, some of this stuff will help you, but by just doing what you're doing, you're already probably getting closer, because a younger person in general just has the growth mindset already, and I think after a while you can lose that, and I'm just trying to help you all get that back, because the being creative and trying to express your own self on the table is really, I think, what makes it fun, is that every shot is your shot. All the good ones, all the bad ones, that's all you, everyone gets to see it, and you have to be okay with all that, because that's what's actually happening in life, is that you're living your life and everyone can see what you're doing, but really, you're the only one that really matters, because everyone else is living their own life, you know, so what matters is, like, what do you think about what you're doing, right? And if you're trying to grow, there's other people out there doing that. So anyways, I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time.